Hello, this is Brett Knowles from PM2 Consulting. This quick YouTube is a summary of an upcoming session we'll be providing for the Ontario Government's Transformation Services team. This webinar is intended to help people understand the conversation flow and give us some feedback on the content. We'll start off with a brief introduction with our credentials to be speaking to the team, and then quickly move on to the topic. And the summary of this is, what are the lessons learned around measurement? And there's two core messages. One is you need to start the measurement process early in the transformation project because the measures describe the desired state that we want the transformation to take. They allow us to establish the baseline to make sure that we can see the gains that are getting made, and they allow us to make the change real in the context of your stakeholders. The second major lesson learned is never stop measuring. And within that, the issues are the measurement motivates the team by showing them the progress of the tough work they're doing. Secondly, it provides proves that your project is actually succeeding at the transformation activity. It gives you feedback on what works best and isn't working well for the team. And then finally, it makes sure those changes that you've worked hard to gain stick. So let's link it back to the transformation model put forward by the OPS framework. And this framework describes what are the steps we need to do through transformation, and I'm going to show you how measurement links in each of those steps. It's important to note that the measurement process is in fact an important part of the overall planning. And secondly, we're going to be talking about indicators more than measures. Measures tend to be a more precise, specific measurement, whereas an indicator is trying to determine, is it indicative of the activity underway. So for example, some of our clients use absenteeism as an indicator of employee satisfaction. It's not precisely right, but it's good enough for management purposes to indicate what's going on. So let's go to the story at hand. As you build your case for change, each step has a component of measurement in it. So for example, when you build the case for change, we have to make sure that we measure what matters in the organization. So in this step, you're going to be determining what are your overall goals and therefore what are the key success measures of your transformation. As we move on to the next step, build the transformation strategy, we're going to be breaking those goals down into manageable objectives, things that you can do on a more frequent basis, and therefore begin pointing you towards more dynamic indicators. The next step is establishing a strong team. Well, in this stage, we're going to begin to aligning individuals and assigning activities. So those objectives we defined in the previous step, now we're going to know which teams or individuals are accountable for doing it, and obviously those will show up on their dashboards and scorecards. The next step, design the transformation plan. It's here we take the previous two steps, what are the objectives and what are the teams, and applying them to a timeline. So now the teams know what they're supposed to get done and for when. The next step where measurement plays up is about communicating and engaging and aligning the organization. Measures make the change more tangible, and therefore they become the center of all communications, and as we'll see later, how it is we enable engagement and alignment. Next, of course, we need to measure and sustain the change. So the ongoing feedback, which is populated by the measures, allows your stakeholders to know that the team is making the desired transformations. So that's a quick overview of where it connects. The best way for you to understand this is through the eyes of a case. So let's take a look at the work we did for the City of Los Angeles' Social Services. Now, LA Social Services is about 14,000 employees, which I know it's large by Canadian standards, but they have the same issues that we have. You know, they have an increasing demand, a decreasing budget, and a complex environment to operate in. So in their case, they needed to build the case for change about how to deal with the increased demand, decreased budgets. And they did that by describing their transformation objectives as what's called a strategy map. So what they did is they took their mission statement, things like to provide accurate and timely benefits and effective services to individuals, and they began building that into a strategy map. And I'll show you how they did this. They understood what are the core elements that their department's supposed to do. So things like their overall goal is to provide accurate and timely benefits. Within that, we sort of just frisked the mission statements and extracted the important element. So one is they need to deliver effective services. Another objective is they need to provide accurate and timely benefits. And they provide food stamps and stuff like that. They also need to be able to help alleviate hardship within the cases that they're working on. They want to, and part of that is obviously promoting personal responsibility. And then finally, they want to help people move towards economic independence. So the important thing to note here is they're not recreating the transformational goal. They're merely taking a look at what is the predefined strategy and goals for that department and begin making them a little bit more tangible. So if we begin the process, we go beyond the stakeholders to take a look at some of the internal objectives. Now, in many cases, there's overlap, and so we didn't increase the number of objectives. We just understood that these additional elements fit into the definition. But there's other new elements like innovation. So we want to be innovative in the programs and services. We want to make sure that we promote a shared leadership, teamwork, and individual responsibility. We wanted to maintain that standard, which is part of effective services. So you can see we've sort of extracted the core concepts out of the mission and put them into the strategy map. Now, they also had a desire to separate these by perspective. What are the internal processes we needed to work on, and what are the enablers? We then took a look at their overall philosophy. And again, we extracted what are the core elements of the philosophy, and where necessary, we added them to the definitions, and where we came up with new concepts, we added new objectives onto the strategy map. So by the time we're done, we ended up with a series of objectives which defined what the transformation should look like. So they saw themselves at the end of the day through consolidating their previous philosophy, mission statements, and what were in different business plans, and developed a strategy map that looked a bit like this. So to interpret this strategy map, they said to be successful, our transformation needs to overall deliver effective services. To do that, there are 4 core things we need to do: provide accurate and timely benefits, alleviate hardship, enable economic independence, and promote personal responsibility. Underpinning that are the internal or organizational things we need to do. We need to expand our resources given constrained budgets. We need to innovate the programs and services we offer. We have to create private and public sector partnerships, and we have to serve as a catalyst for action. And as a catalyst, we can create the partnerships, innovate our programs, and expand resources. So serve as a catalyst became a critical objective. And then we needed to support developing our staff, promote that collaborative culture and philosophy, and of course strengthen our physical capabilities. So that's their transition plan. Now they need to take that and build that into their transformation strategy. So what that looked like to them is they needed to cascade down that overall agency transformation strategy into what the different departments were going to do. So and the idea here is we might have an objective overall like deliver the right services. As we cascade it down, each team or department needs to figure out how do they contribute to that overall objective. So that cascade fits into 3 categories: mandatory, contributory, discretionary, and this is showing the contributory framework. So in this case, we have the overall department strategy map that we looked at, and one of the departments or bureaus. In this case, they're Bureau of Workforce Services. And so this becomes a contract between the transformation that's happening at the bureau level and the transformation at the overall agency or department level. And we understand how the different objectives cascade down so that at the end of the day, if we begin changing our priorities at the departmental level, we'll know exactly what elements at the bureau level we need to modify. That gives us that transformation plan. And within those objectives, we've put weighting on it based on what is the focus. In other words, in the transformation world, the focus or weighting comes from basically multiplying how important the objective is, how broken it is, and how tough it is to fix. So you can see in this case, their focus is strongly about delivering effective services and accurate and timely benefits. And then, of course, ultimately, we'll see later, how do we measure that success? So how do we break that down? Our job here is to begin building out that transformational program. What we should be able to do is link our core processes to these objectives. In other words, these are core processes they have inside workforce. And obviously, if a process has a high impact on a highly weighted objective, it becomes important. But if a process has a high impact on a low-weighted objective, then the process becomes less important. So we can begin to prioritize where we need to be making our repairs. So if we take a look at deliver effective and caring services, some of our processes touch it. So these become more important processes because they're touching a more important objective. Now, that's how we sort out the transformation strategy. The next step of sorting out the team is this. Obviously, if we understand those strategic objectives and we link them down to those process and projects like we just did, we can then build those back up by individual accountabilities. You see, these people are accountable for doing these process and projects to get these objectives done. So I can begin to sort out who's accountable for what in the transformation journey. You'd be surprised at the number of organizations we go into where people think we're doing a great job at the objective, yet people are getting bad performance reviews. Or what's more common is the opposite. People are getting these stellar performance reviews, yet we're missing our overall strategic objectives. How could this possibly be? It can only be if we haven't done this linkage in the middle. So by doing the linkage, we can establish clear accountabilities, which is the next step in your transformation. Now, let's talk about measuring and sustaining it. There was no shortage of information that was required for governmental and regulatory reporting. And so we should be able to now take those existing reports and discover where we're already collecting data to populate this table that we've created. So now we can begin linking those processes. And then by linking the processes with the existing measures, begin to build a scorecard on how well we're performing against each of those objectives. And in fact, we can add those up to give an overall score to provide a chart that shows us how well each objective needs to be supported and the incremental impact of each process on the overall success of the organization. Now, what we can also do is, based on the actual performance, understand what is the gap between how we're currently performing and what the strategy calls for. So in this case, obviously our transformation activities are looking for where is that largest gap, the largest hash mark. And now it becomes obvious if we want to make transformation happen, we should focus on those larger hash marks, not on these smaller ones. So that allows us to begin to take a look at our projects as well. So we look at both our processes and projects and make sure the projects are lined up to where there's gaps. So for example, here we can see we have all sorts of gaps in the performance, yet we have no projects to close the gap. In other cases, we're performing fine, yet we have projects lined up. So let's realign those projects to help close those performance gaps. In fact, we can add those onto the same chart and begin to see whether our portfolio of projects are in fact causing the transformation to occur where we need it. So this is the alignment of the processes in the transformation projects. Then finally, as we said before, we can use those to indicate how well the transformation is performing and make that available to everyone through various management tools. The final step here is now the performance reporting process. So let's talk about that for a second. You're still going to have those daily or weekly meetings that you already have. And in those meetings, you spend 80% of your time reviewing performance and maybe 20% taking corrective action. Each month, those should get consolidated into these scorecards that shows how that overall transformation is occurring at the departmental level. And those meetings are slightly different. We're going to spend less time reviewing the performance, let's say half the meeting. And it's going to give us time to be able to discuss the implications of the current performance and maybe make some decisions about actions. And so that's going to go on every single month. Now, that happens in most organizations. What we now need to add in is sort of a new conversation. And that new conversation is, let's talk about our overall strategy and priorities. We've set up a transformation plan, but as the plan unfolds, we get better traction in some areas and less in others. We need to take a look at that and make sure that our priorities are still correct. So now we spend even less time on reviewing performance, from 80% to 50% to maybe 10%. That gives us more time to discuss the implications of the performance, but most importantly in this meeting, refine our strategic issues and priorities. And so we'll now use that revised weighting and we'll change the priorities to run the next period. Again, daily, weekly, monthly meetings, same profile. We're going to get together. Now we're going to have another discussion and refine that transformation again. So this organization is going to end up with 4 learning cycles in the same period of time that we used to have just 1. And that makes it more agile and makes the transformation more effective as we go forward. So that's a quick review of the overall measurement structure and how it fits into transformation, an example of how it fits through a case. So hopefully that gives you a feeling for what this story looks like, and we can now begin discussing how to modify this for the actual presentation.